Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking inward. We're going to focus on self-awareness,
Right.
thinking about, who you are beneath all the roles and responsibilities, the stuff others expect.
Yeah, the external pressures.
Exactly. It's kind of like holding up a mirror, isn't it, to your thoughts, feelings, how you act.
It really is. And it's surprising how often we just sort of operate without really checking in.
Totally. Just going through the motions.
Yeah, on autopilot. You don't always have a clear sense of what's actually driving you or, how things are affecting you deep down.
Right. And that lack of checking in can cause some real problems, can't it?
Oh, definitely.
Like repeating patterns you don't even like, or really struggling when stress hits, or just feeling a bit lost.
Adrift.
Yeah. So our mission today is to explore this. We found a really insightful conversation about it on the EDP English Dialogue podcast channel on YouTube.
A good source.
Yeah, we've pulled out some key bits from their discussion to really, dig into building self-awareness and find some practical things you can actually use.
Think of it as a shortcut, maybe.
Exactly. A shortcut to getting a handle on this really vital skill.
And it's worth saying this isn't just like navel gazing, understanding yourself better. It genuinely helps. Better decisions, relationships.
Yeah.
Just a more, satisfying life.
Okay, so let's unpack that definition a bit more. Self-awareness, understanding thoughts, emotions, behaviors. You mentioned the mirror analogy from the podcast. What strikes you about that?
Well, the reflection part is key, I think. We spend so much energy looking out, dealing with the world,
Right.
that we don't always make space to look in. And it's not just knowing what you're doing, but really grasping why you're doing it and, what that feels like for you.
And if we don't have that inner look, what happens then? The podcast mentioned repeating unhealthy patterns, bad stress reactions, feeling directionless.
Yeah, and they had a great example, actually. Someone just constantly feeling swamped, overwhelmed.
So relatable.
Very. And without that self-awareness, they might just keep saying yes, keep piling things on. Maybe because they need to please people or they're scared of saying no, but they don't realize that's the driver.
Okay.
But as the example showed, just pausing, asking, okay, what's really going on inside me right now? That can uncover those hidden reasons.
And then you can actually change something.
Exactly. Like maybe setting some boundaries, making a positive shift.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. The podcast guys brought up how our emotions, even the tough ones like anxiety, they're actually giving us clues, information.
Yes, that's such a crucial reframe. Instead of just thinking, oh no, anxiety, got to push that away.
Like fight or flight, yeah.
Yeah. The idea is to ask, okay, what is this feeling actually trying to tell me? It's data, you know?
Data about your internal state.
Precisely, that anxiety.
Yeah.
Maybe it is signaling you're pushing too hard, or you're stepping into something new, unfamiliar territory. Recognizing that lets you respond more, helpfully.
They also talked about journaling, like actually writing stuff down, feelings, triggers. How does that help build this awareness?
Well, the act of writing it down, it makes it concrete, doesn't it? It externalizes what's going on inside.
Takes it out of your head.
Exactly. And they use that example of feeling really irritated every Monday morning. And through journaling, linking it to this specific team meeting they disliked. Just seeing it written down can reveal those connections, those patterns you wouldn't normally spot.
And once you spot the pattern,
Then you have options like, okay, maybe I can prepare differently for that meeting, or maybe I need to talk about changing the format. It gives you agency.
another technique they brought up was mindfulness, things like focusing on your breath. It seems so simple, but how does that help you understand yourself?
It's about cultivating that present moment awareness, really. When you intentionally focus on something basic, like your breath, you start to notice other things. Subtle shifts in your body, the constant chatter in your head, underlying feelings that might just be humming away in the background.
Like that tension in your shoulders you didn't realize was there.
Exactly. Or that tight feeling in your chest. Physical signs of stress become clearer when you just pay attention for a moment. It's another layer of data.
Okay, so it's not all about just looking inward, though, is it? The podcast also talked about feedback from other people, which, let's be honest, can be tough to hear sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It can be uncomfortable. But, the people around us, friends, family, colleagues, they often see things we don't, our blind spots.
Right.
So the key thing is being willing to hear it, even if your first reaction is defensive. They mentioned that anecdote, didn't they? Someone thought they were a great communicator, but got feedback that they always jumped to giving advice instead of just, acknowledging how the other person felt.
Ouch. But useful.
Very useful, if they could hear it. And that brings us to the how you approach that feedback.
It's not about just taking it as criticism, but more about being curious.
Exactly. Curiosity is the magic word there. Instead of just shutting down or arguing, can you genuinely ask, okay, tell me more about that. Try to understand their perspective.
Shifting from judgment to curiosity.
That's where the real learning happens. That's what the podcast emphasized.
They also talked about identifying core values, the things that really truly matter to you. How does knowing your values help with self-awareness?
Well, think of your values as your internal compass. They guide your choices, give you that gut feeling about what feels right or wrong for you.
Right.
When what you're doing aligns with your values, say, you value creativity and you're in a creative role, you feel more energized, purposeful.
And when it doesn't align?
That's when you feel that unease, that friction, like the example they gave. Valuing autonomy but being stuck in a really rigid job. Recognizing that value helps you understand why you're unhappy and points you towards seeking something that fits better.
And our reactions. Getting angry when someone's disrespectful or sad when things don't meet our standards. Those reactions can also tell us something deeper, right? About underlying beliefs.
Oh, definitely. Those recurring patterns often linked back to fundamental beliefs we hold about ourselves, about how the world works.
Like a?
Well, say you consistently get furious about perceived disrespect. Maybe that taps into an underlying belief about your own worth needing to be constantly validated. Or maybe you believe conflict is always bad and must be avoided at all costs.
Okay, I see.
Becoming aware of those core beliefs, I'm only worthy if I'm perfect, or I must always avoid conflict, that awareness gives you the power to actually examine them, to question if they're really true, or if they're serving you.
They shared that really relatable example, didn't they? Someone believing they had to say yes to everything to be seen as helpful.
Yes, the people-pleaser trap.
Which just led to burnout.
Yeah.
So how does realizing, okay, that's the belief driving this, actually help?
It's crucial. Because once you identify that narrative, my worth depends on always saying yes, you can start to challenge it. Is that really true? Is that the only way to be helpful? What's the cost to me?
Right, questioning the assumption.
Exactly. And that awareness is the absolute first step toward making different choices, setting boundaries, taking back some control over your own well-being.
It feels like all this inner work doesn't just stay inside, does it? The podcast mentioned how it impacts mental health, relationships.
Absolutely. There's a ripple effect. Understanding your own triggers, your emotional landscape. It just makes communication so much easier, fewer misunderstandings.
And maybe more empathy.
Definitely more empathy. When you get a better handle on your own feelings, you're naturally better equipped to understand and appreciate what someone else might be going through. You recognize the shared human experience more.
Okay, what about habits? Those things we do that we wish we didn't, like procrastination. How does self-awareness help there?
Well, it goes back to understanding the driver, doesn't it? How can you really change a habit if you don't know why you're doing it in the first place?
Makes sense.
So with procrastination, maybe you realize through self-reflection that it's actually rooted in a fear of being judged on the final product.
Perfectionism sneaking in.
Could be. And just recognizing that fear allows you to address that directly instead of just battling the urge to avoid the task. You're treating the cause, not just the symptom.
It really sounds like this whole process.
Yeah.
It's not a quick fix. They mentioned patience being important.
Hugely important. Growth takes time. It's often messy, not linear at all. Self-awareness helps you be kinder to yourself through that process.
Like compassionate.
Yeah. Instead of beating yourself up for not changing overnight, you learn to notice and appreciate the small insights, the tiny steps forward.
So practically speaking, what did the podcast suggest for actually doing this day to day? Any simple tips?
Yeah, some really accessible things, like just pausing a few times during the day, asking yourself, hey, how am I actually feeling right now?
It's a quick check-in.
Just a check-in. Or at the end of the day, spending maybe 5 minutes thinking, what went well, what felt a bit off, why did I react that way in that situation?
Reflecting back.
Exactly. And they also gave a nod to things like meditation apps or therapy or coaching, not as a requirement, but as potentially really helpful resources.
And seeking that help isn't weakness.
No. It's a sign of strength, a commitment to your own growth.
So thinking bigger picture, where does all this self-awareness ultimately lead? They mentioned finding meaning.
Yeah, that's a key outcome, I think. When you really understand what drives you, what gives you energy, what aligns with those core values we talked about,
Hmm.
you're much better positioned to pursue goals that feel genuinely meaningful to you, not just what you think you should do.
Like the example of someone feeling lost, but then realizing they had this passion for helping people learn.
Exactly. And that clarity then guided their choices towards things like coaching or teaching, leading to a more fulfilling path.
It really sounds like it's not a destination then. You don't just become self-aware and then you're done.
No, not at all. It's definitely an ongoing journey. We change, life throws new things at us, so our inner world is always shifting too.
So you need to stay curious.
Curiosity and openness are key. Keep paying attention. The good news is, the more you practice, the easier it gets. You become quicker at noticing your internal state.
Which means you can be more intentional, less reactive.
Exactly. More intentional, less reactive, and actually more compassionate, both towards yourself and towards other people.
So wrapping this up, building self-awareness, it's really about intentionally shining a light inward, isn't it? Learning to navigate that inner space with a bit more wisdom.
Well put. And that leads to more honesty with yourself, more alignment in your life, and ultimately, yeah, a deeper sense of contentment.
It's a continuous process, understanding that inner world and seeing how much it really affects everything, our choices, our well-being.
It really does. This deep dive has hopefully pulled out some useful ways to think about that continuous process.
And we really hope this conversation, drawing on that EDP podcast discussion, has given you, our listener, some practical ideas, tools to maybe start or continue your own journey of self-discovery.
Consider it a useful resource on your path.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought to leave you with?
Yeah, maybe a question to mull over.
Good idea. What's one small insight, maybe just one little thing, that sparked something for you during this discussion?
And how could you maybe explore that specific thing a bit more intentionally in the next few days?
What new questions about yourself has this brought up? Something to think about.